Three, two, one. Hi, everyone, and this is another episode of Failure Friday, where we talk to friends, clients, and sometimes complete strangers about how failure has made them better at their career, better at their personal life, something that they're working towards, how a failure has projected them forward, how they've fallen forward and come back even better. And with that, hopefully we can help someone early on in their career path or just have a great conversation. And today we have a good friend of mine and client, Ms. Wendy Griffis. Wendy is a real estate agent and group leader out of Jacksonville, Florida for Better Homes and Gardens, a lifestyle brand here. And I would say she's an author too. I think we left that out of your intro. We talk a little bit about that. But Wendy, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Yeah, so thank you, Kendall, for having me. And I just want to say and acknowledge that you doing this podcast really is something that a lot of people kind of shy away from this particular subject matter, right? So I really think it's cool that you're just kind of exploring what that looks like and allowing there to be conversation around that. So thank you for having me. So yes, your introduction was great. I am a real estate agent. I've been one for 22 years now in Jacksonville. And, we have, I think there's 16,000 realtors in Jacksonville now. So when you say, hey, I'm a real estate agent, everybody has their preconceived ideas of what that means. And so I would just say that, I'm really passionate about real estate by relationship, not necessarily real estate by how much money I can put into my pocket. And then I met you several years ago, and I don't know about you, but for me, you just lit me up. You're so,
I believe I cried. I left that appointment. I was like, I fucking blew that because I was like, I cried. The first appointment.
But that's the kind of people I like to associate with. People who are real, people who have souls, and aren't afraid to be transparent, right? And I think that that's what this podcast really allows for, is a little more transparency in your everyday business, dealings and relationships.
I agree, because I was getting caught up in just keeping up with social media. I found myself like almost getting depressed, because with running a business and a family and then managing all of our outside stuff, there wasn't enough time to look perfect on social media. So I would get on and I wouldn't be posting any content, but I'd be looking at everybody else's pretty and shiny content. And I was just getting sad. And I was like, this is bullshit. A lot of my clients that are business owners, I know that their life's not all shiny and roses, but they're super successful. Like, how can we create that into something that gives back to the community in a positive way, but also creates vulnerability and authenticity? And thank you for being one of the first people to join us. And your story of how you got into the real estate industry is a little bit different than most. First of all, today, because there's so many real estate agents, it's hard to find people that have the tenure that you have. Like, you've been through the 2008, and you had already been in the industry for quite some time when 2008 came around, and you survived it. Talk to us about how you came into the industry.
Yeah, so I have a degree in statistics, and I wanted to be an actuary when I grew up, which is the study of statistics for insurance companies. And so I went for my master's at Georgia State. And while I was there, I realized that I am good at statistics, but it was really boring, right? Like, I am more of a people person. I like to connect. And so when, the college students would get together and they're like, we're going to go study, they actually did. They studied, right? Usually, when you'd go study, it would be, let's go and hang out. So anyway, I kind of went through this, like, okay, if I don't do that, what am I going to do with this degree? And statistics is a really pigeonholed degree. So I kind of floundered for a few years in corporate America, trying to find my footing. And I ended up in a project management position that allowed me to grow as fast as I wanted to, because that was the thing I found out with corporate America is I'd get a job, I would master it, and then I'm like, what's next? And they're like, well, you take this position for 3 years and then we'll give you a raise and then you get the next level. And I'm like, oh, that's not fast enough for me. So short version is it was Y2K 2000. The world was going to end, and I was on a project, helping the computers get turned over, so that they wouldn't crash. And as soon as the world did not end on January 2, I ended up without a job. They're like, okay, well, all that work you've been having for the last couple of years is gone, and the company filed bankruptcy. And I just remember feeling like I know, right? I mean, that was the tech days, right? In 2000, there were all these tech companies that were, up and coming, paying big salaries, but then, didn't survive. So anyway, long story short is I had just built my very first house, and my realtor and we would stand out in the driveway, and we would just talk for hours after our appointment because I just had so many questions, and I'm kind of a nerd like that. And so January 2, I'm without a job, and I remember calling her and I'm like, can you make any money in that real estate thing, And she's like, come on in, the water's warm. And that's pretty much the qualifications you need is, a desire. And so I got my license in February of 2022, and or 2020, sorry, or 2000. God, what year is it?
Yeah.
And I was off to the races. But what's really interesting is that in real estate, they really don't teach you how to run a business. You get your license, so now you know some law, right? But ultimately, there's no business, running a business idea. So I was really green for a while, with that. But
that takes time. But I would say that that's the same, not just for real estate. It's really any industry. Like if you go into welding or you become really good at a specific thing, you're like, wow, I love this. I should turn this into a small business. There's a whole nother world that I don't think people realize, that business administration in itself is a whole skill that you could spend years and you'll still never master it because tax law, everything's ever changing. But I tell all my clients that have teenagers, I don't care what they're good at least get a minor in business management or business administration. Because those skills, well, if you don't, you could lose thousands of dollars when you first start out just because you don't know what you're doing.
And real estate's kind of like that. You don't know what you don't know. So, you just go to work and try and make sales and, do some things. And, the good news is I had a broker that mentored me early on, and I felt like I got some good starting advice. And then in general, I'm just really driven, and, that stems from whatever, right? And so there was no holding me back. I worked hard, long hours, and I won't say I made a name for myself because ultimately, there is so much noise, but everybody that I served, I definitely had an impact on. And but one of the things, and kind of, I know this is failure Friday, so the thing that I wanted to make sure that I got to was the fact that I had this upward trajectory in my career, consistently growing year over year, from 2000 to about 2006. And then if you know anything about finance and the Great Recession, things started to go sideways, and I was still relatively new, and I did not really understand what was happening. And so I don't know how deep you want me to go into the story, but we pretty much lost everything during that time frame. And what I think was the big, we'll call it aha moment. And it's so funny when you're going through, we'll call it the shit storm, right? You're not having these lessons. You don't learn these things while you're going through it. It's always afterwards when you've had some time to kind of look back and go, oh, that's what I was doing at that time, right?
Hindsight.
And so, if I can give some background for those people who were not entrepreneurs and who were not real estate agents during that time, a lot of people lost their jobs, and, I'd be helping clients that I helped buy a house. They would contact me and say, hey, I can't make my mortgage payment anymore. I've lost my job. I need to sell my house. And of course, values had started to come down, and people had over leveraged themselves on what they bought. They took out home equity lines. So they, ended up with double mortgages, and then the house was worth less than what they owed. And so we went through this period of, doing a lot of short sales with banks, and it was just a really hard time because normally in a real estate transaction, there's a positive thing that is happening. I'd say 75% of the time when someone moves, it's because they've had a baby, or they just got married, or maybe they're downsizing to be closer to their grandkids. There's all real positive reasons to make a move, not because you've lost your job and your house is worth less than you paid for it.
Yeah,
and now you got to go move into a rental. Yeah. And so I had a really hard time staying positive because I'm dealing with really difficult emotional processes, not just the real estate transaction. And then personally, I was going through the same thing financially, right? So my income was down. It was cut in half, basically, from where I had gotten to in my career. And then my husband lost his job in 2009. So we had to short sell. Yeah, he was unemployed for 2.5 years. And
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people lost their jobs during that time. And I remember saying during the time, oh, it can't be longer than a year. Like, this will be over in a year. We'll get through this, right? And then 2 years, it'll be over. It can't last any longer, 5 years of just like, how are we going to survive? How are we going to pay the bills? So we had built this beautiful custom home in 2004, and we had to sell that and move into a rental that was, in my opinion, awful. Like, I just couldn't believe I was living there. And I remember just trying to fit my stuff in the closet and crying, because I had come from this big walk-in closet, and now I had this tiny little, my shoes wouldn't even fit. And just wondering, how did my life get to this point? And I was probably, so that would have been 2008. So I was 38, almost to 40, right? And usually
so your son was born.
Yep. My son was 2003. So he was young, and we asked him, he's an adult now, and we asked him, do you remember like us struggling? But he had no real memory of it, because we really tried hard to.
Thank God, because as a parent, right, that's your biggest, like, I feel like that would be in the forefront of my mind. Like, does he feel what I feel? Like the stress and the anxiety, like, just as a mom, like, you don't want those feelings to be projected onto your child. Usually kids are really resilient with that stuff, but that's good.
I think for him, he, the good news is he did. So for me, I knew where I came from. So where I was a bad place, right? And so, you talk about failure, I felt like a failure. Like, what happened? Why am I in this place? What have I done wrong that have ended up here? But he didn't know any better, right? He just knew we moved a lot. Like, we moved 3 times in 5 years, because when you're renting, the lease comes up and they want to sell, or blah, 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 whatever. And so I just wasn't sleeping well at night, because, stability in your home matters. And I remember it being the last 30 days of the lease, and I'd be like, I'd like to renew the lease. And the landlord would be like, well, we're not sure what we're going to do. I'm like, you can't give me a not sure. I need to know where I'm going to be living.
Well, by law, right, you need 30 days, right? So for people watching this, if you're either a landlord or you have renters, you have to give, in at least the state of Florida, 30 days notice before you renew or not renew.
And so a couple of times they weren't renewed, and then I get into panic mode. Okay, where are we moving to next? So, it's just a really difficult time, financially, emotionally. And I think where the lesson is from there is that I tied my worth and my value to my career.
Very much.
I believed that my career and my production was who I was. And what I learned through that is that failure is an event. It's not a person. But I didn't feel it at the time. At the time, I personally felt like a failure. And I think it was even harder for me because I'm a realtor, right? So here I am, a real estate agent, and I don't even own a house for 5 years. I was renting, and I just felt not integrity around that. I just felt really, really bad that I
understand that.
So
in my own business, integrity, I feel, so when I meet with clients, the first thing I always tell them is everything you own, I own. Every single thing I buy for you, I will show you me or AJ and I's personal statement. It is in our portfolio. So, and I like to preach. I think it creates trust early on, which is so important in both of our industries. Trust, And to not feel like I have that level of integrity would hurt me. I would not show up as my best self if I could not say that. So I really resonate with that point. But I want to go back to one thing you said. So when it first started happening in the industry, do you have a moment where maybe you're meeting with a client where you started, obviously it's in the news, you were hearing about it constantly. I remember being young and my dad talking about it constantly and us reading about it constantly. Was there a moment maybe during a transaction with a particular customer where you're like, oh no, like I feel it now. I've heard about it, but now I feel it. And do you remember that moment?
So the one that comes up for me, and it's a little sensitive, God, I think that was gonna come up. Thank you. No, was that I had helped this client purchase a very nice luxury house, and we were doing the walkthrough like right before closing, and the previous owners did not leave it in a very clean condition, and so I was reaching out to different cleaning services to see if I could get someone over there right away so we could have a clean house for closing so they can move in. And normally it's going to sound horrible to say this as a realtor, but I don't answer my phone unless I know who's calling because I get so much spam and
I'm the same way.
Yeah. Want to buy some insurance? No, but this particular day I answered my phone because I was expecting a call back from a cleaning service. And it was a debt collector. And I'm standing there in the foyer, I can see it to this day, with my high-end client in the kitchen. And I'm trying to get off the phone to say, I know I owe you the money. I don't have it, but how do you say that in front of a client? And it freaked me out. Like, okay, something's got to give here. And it was because I am one, I pay my bills, we were, and I think that was the other thing, that when you are a renter, and I'm not saying anything negative about renters, but when you've been a homeowner and then you're forced to rent, like it's one thing to rent. We rented, college, high school, whatever.
Yeah, I rented for 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, I think we rented for 10 years before we bought our first house. We didn't know where we were going to live, but once you become a homeowner, and then you rent, not by choice, but you're forced to, it just, made me feel like less than worthless, and the fact that I had debts that I couldn't pay broke me, I just couldn't even fathom not being able to pay for housing, food, car, all of the things. So that was a moment. I remember that.
In our industries in particular, so much, and I'm not saying this is a healthy thing, but for me, it's been manageable so far, but so much of our life and our profession intertwine. It's very difficult. I have met no one in my industry that keeps a totally separate personal life and a totally separate professional life. And especially, like you said, that is a perfect example because your hours are like mine. They're totally unpredictable. There might be a day where you only have 4 hours of work, and then there's going to be a day where you're 14 hours, you have to keep it turned on. So I probably would have cried right there. I don't know if you did, but I don't know if I would have been able to keep it together. I'm a very emotional person, guys. Well, that's huge. So you would say that marks the beginning of the recession for you, that moment.
That is an event that I remember very clearly, that I knew there was a problem, right? Like, how am I going to do this? Because I can't be serving customers and then having these kind of issues happening. And I think for me, I felt a little like I didn't share with very many people especially my clients, what I was personally going through, even though I was going through the same thing that I was helping them with, which is selling their house as a short sale, moving into a rental. I didn't want to share that with my customers. There were a couple, that, I'm like, I understand how you're feeling. I'm going through that too,
Right.
And so, and interestingly, some of those customers are still some of my very best customers because I was able to share that. But I feel it's really important to have competence in what you do. And I, like you said, that personal and professional balance. I just didn't want the world to know that, I was having these problems behind the scenes. And truthfully, ultimately a customer just wants you to serve them to the highest of your ability. And they don't really care what's going on behind the scenes, but it was really important for me to figure myself out.
I think that depends on the customer, right? So I can tell when I'm meeting with someone, I try to be really perceptive of their emotional need, not just their investment need. Some people want me to be more relatable. So I need to give them more of my personal life because they're scared and they need to know that I'm not going to steal all of their money and move to China overnight. So I need to become more relatable. And the other people where I just have to be proficient. I have to tell them, all right, they don't care about what AJ does. They don't care that I have 2 kids. They don't care about my resume. They just need to know what I'm going to do and how it's going to be better than what they've already been doing or what they've gotten in the past. So you really have to read. I think there's an acumen in being a professional or business owner or in anything that you do, and being able to read what people want and not just having a cookie cutter version of yourself for every single person. I'm not saying be fake and, morph into whatever someone needs you to be for that moment or for that appointment. But there is competence to speak to what you said and knowing how to serve people in that moment so that they get the most value out of the experience you provide them. So I think that you sharing that with certain people was incredibly important because those people might have needed that. Maybe even sharing it with more people in that very traumatic time. I mean, how Wendy, I've heard her say it multiple times, talk about 2008 in a nutshell is, I still have, you have it, 2008
post-traumatic recession disorder.
That's what she says. And she says it just like that. I have post-traumatic recession disorder. That's how she says it. And it's always stuck with me. Now, I want to speak to a more personal aspect, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but I do think it's valuable, is how did the strength of your relationship in your marriage come into play to get you through this? Because a lot of people, I remember a lot of my clients today that are divorced or they're on their second or third marriage, a lot of their divorces happened during this time period. Yours didn't.
Serious question. And, we talk about memories that kind of trigger. I remember standing in the kitchen of this beautiful custom home that every day when I walked through the house, I was like, I love my house. I love my house. I love my house. And then I started to, around 2007, be like, if this lasts any longer, we're not going to be able to keep the house, right? And then 2008, if this lasts any longer, we're not going to be able to keep the house. And after 2009, we couldn't. But I remember standing in the kitchen and this, again, my husband, so I don't mind sharing it, but we were just embracing and we were, kind of not crying, but just holding on tight and saying, no matter what happens around us, we have each other.
This is going to make me cry.
And I literally felt like the world was swirling around us and all we could do was just hold right here as tight as we could. And then I would say a lot of grace because, Jason was unemployed for 2.5 years.
But not till after, not till 2009, you said.
2009. But that wasn't after. So there was I'll tell you when after was 2012. It was from 2006.
Well, no, that was after you had felt the impact in your industry though, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I'm holding it together. Thank God he had a job until 2009, right? So I was not making as much money, but his job at least had some stability, that we could pay the mortgage and, keep up as best we could. But after he lost his job, and he couldn't find another one. Like he was actively looking, like he wasn't like, hey, I'm just gonna sit back on the couch and relax, like he wanted to work. He's a worker, he does not shy away from hard work. But he, at that time, nobody was hiring, like everybody was losing their jobs. And so had to really allow for him to grieve also the loss of his job, because he's the man of the house. And again, that lesson of failure is that that's an event that has happened. It does not reflect who you are as a person, right? But I know when I got let go in 2000, I took it very personally, that I didn't have a job, and I know he took it personally. And so we had to work through just understanding that it's a tough time, when someone loses their job and what they're going through emotionally. And I just spent a lot of time trying to lift him up. And then I will say this, I actually had to go to therapy. And
there's nothing wrong with that.
I remember I was with a girlfriend. We were together for Thanksgiving. And she's like, Wendy, I love you so much. You need to get help. And I couldn't see it myself. Like I couldn't see my depression. I couldn't see it. I knew I wasn't sleeping well, probably drinking too much, eating food, bag of chips
constantly
at night. Yeah, like
that's
totally
me.
Self-soothing, and gained a bunch of weight, and I just was not in a good mental space. And so she's like, you need to talk to someone. And I'm like, whatever. And I remember, so I'm like, but because she's my best friend, I'm like, of course, I'll go online, find somebody to talk to. And I remember sitting down for that first appointment, and the lady, I was talking to, she goes, so tell me why you're here. I'm like, to be honest, I'm here because my friend thinks I need to be here or whatever. And she's like, well, what's going on? And then,
yeah.
And I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know. I'd been holding all of that in to try and keep it together at the household, and I think that was a really great lesson for me also, is that I don't have to hold it all in myself, right? Like I felt that, this was something that was my fault, right? And that I could have done something different. And she really gave me clarity. And I think I only went to 3 sessions, but I was like, you're so right. She said basically, real estate let me down, right? As a career. And I had visions of that being, something that was going to be my path, right? And it still is. But at the time I wasn't sure, right? And I was like, so angry, and all the emotions, denial, anger, frustration, disappointment, but I had to get to acceptance. And so I will say, from our relationship, it was strained, right? Like we definitely had some moments, a couple of times, it was on the like, are we gonna stay together or not moment. But I think, to answer your question directly, I think in our marriage, we both know that we made a commitment to stay together, and we're gonna figure it out, and we're gonna love each other the best we can in all circumstances, and as long as both people show up with that, then you're okay. It's when one person checks out, no matter how hard you try, it's really hard to pull it back together.
Right. I would say that's what I'm thankful for in my relationship. And then for people who aren't married yet, it might be too late if you already are. But if you're not married yet, you should look, a quality that I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to is commitment. Like look at other aspects of their life. Like how committed are they to other things in their life? Because that is so important. Like AJ and I do not like each other all the time. I would say maybe half the time we really are getting along. But I trust no matter what we go through, and I mean no matter what, he's going to show up. Especially when it means the stakes are we're not going to be together. Like if I know nothing else about AJ, it's that he will show up. And I like to think he thinks the same about me. So for people that are looking for a spouse or are in a relationship that, you're at that stage where it's either going to propel forward to the next level, which is marriage, or maybe it's monogamy. Look at how they handle commitment in other phases of their life, because that's not the last 2008 or Great Recession. And I do think it's important to say that 2008 did not just last in 2008. I spend a lot of time explaining this to people, especially when I'm designing custom derivative products, is 2008, everyone was great. If you stuck in your investments and whatever, from 2008 to about 2013 is when we really saw everyone, you're back to where you are or better. It took that long for you to recover. So that's the key thing here. With, like, even right now with the market being wishy-washy, you have to stay the course, but you don't know how long you have to stay the course. And it was so important in 2008. The reason why I hear so many advisors or clients like, well, if people would just held on, they would have came right back. Yeah, well, they had to hold on for, 7 years before there was any sense of a safety net again. And that's a long time. And people, that's not the last 2008 of our lifetime. Is going to happen again. So to bring it all together with relationships, that's why it's so important to look for someone who can weather a recession with. Because finances, I cannot stress this enough, are the number one reason for divorce. And they are the number one reason that people come into my office and cry during their appointment. Well, obviously I'm a financial advisor, but it's because of finances and their marriage. That is such a toxic combination if you are not with the right person. So thank you for sharing that. I really wanted to touch on that aspect. How could someone on the same path as a real estate agent, what advice would you give them on the precipice? I mean, I'm not going to say we're in a real estate bubble right now, but things are incredibly hot. It's not going to be this hot forever. So let's just say it's a 2006, beginning of 2007 event right now, maybe a 2005, late 2005. What advice would you give to new people coming into the industry who are already only been in for maybe 2 to 5 years?
For real estate agents? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Go, Jasmine. So actually, I teach a class, and I was in the classroom Monday, and the thing that I told the class, I had an aha moment over the weekend, right? This is what I shared, because I'm just going to back up 1 second.
Go ahead.
I don't know, when this would go, but so the Great Recession happened for sellers, meaning for 5-6 years, sellers lost their means, right? What's happened for sellers?
Their ass. They lost their ass.
Pretty good, right? What happened for sellers is kind of what's happening to buyers right now. Mm-hmm. Meaning a lot of buyers are trying to put in offers, and losing, right? And interest rates are going up, and they can't get a house, not because they don't want to, not because they're not qualified, but they can't compete against people who are paying a lot more. So what I told the class was, we can't control the market that we do business in. And this was probably a big lesson learned from my failure, that I can give that advice today, is I couldn't control what happened between 2006 and 2011, but I can control my activities and my mindset, right? And how I show up in my business, and that it's a long game. Like, if you want to make money quick, real estate can do that, but ultimately, if you want to have a career, it's a long game, right? And what we can control, and what's interesting, I'll just back up a little bit, even during the recession, when we couldn't afford our mortgage or whatever, I still marketed to my clients. I still sent my monthly mail out to my database. My business, I did have to make some cuts, but I kept funding my business because I knew that was my long-term goal. And what was super fascinating to me, as difficult as that was, my business expenses took priority over some of my home expenses, right? We had to cut back at the home so I could feed my business. When things started to improve in 2012, my business skyrocketed because I had faithfully still built my business even during very difficult times. And so if there was a newer agent that's struggling right now because it's a really hard time to help buyers, and they don't have a lot of listings, so they're not getting a lot of closings, I would say just keep doing the right things and stay the course. and get therapy.
I think that's great. I feel like every podcast I'm like, get therapy.
So we kind of, at our office, we kind of create a culture of support, right? Trying to help other agents. I always say, come into the office, get your shot of positive so you can go out and face the dragons out there, and mindset is really such an important thing. And I remember it was probably around 2011, because I'm a big reader, and I had stopped reading, right? I was just one of those things where, and I'm like, all right, I got to grab this book and this book. And I'm just reading, like, give me something positive, because I had really, really struggled, keeping my head in the real estate game. And so I think you almost have to do extra work around that when times are tough.
Okay, so I think that's really great. That's one thing I need to get better on. So I'm glad you brought that up, is I need to get back into reading. I used to read a book a week, and I'm lucky if I get a book every 6 months in, and that's not okay. But to speak to what we spoke about earlier, it's just when you're a business owner, if you don't adequately delegate, business administration will take over what you're doing. And that's kind of this 2021 was all about delegating. That was my word, which you taught me. Pick a word, stick to it. Really liked that. So going back to what you said, so you said real estate agents that are struggling to service their buyers. What about the real estate agents that are just booming right now? What would you warn them? What headlight warning would you give them to say, hey, I know everything's going great right now, but prepare? What is an actionable tool or skill?
I actually have a great lesson learned from failure, and that is, don't base your lifestyle off of what's happening right now, because that's what happened to me in 2004. Is we built this big, beautiful, we were doing well business wise, was good. 2004, we're like, yeah, let's build this custom house, things are good, and then they weren't. And I think we kind of shared just the other day, I have my eye on a house that I would love to move into right now, and I could absolutely afford it based on a booming couple of years. But I have learned my lesson that booming couple of years does not indicate what next year's going to be or the year after that. And so, don't let your expenses raise to your income until it's stable and you can do so.
I love that, because I see that a lot with my athlete clients, is that maybe they're on the brink of a new contract year, or that maybe this is their contract year, and they just start spending ridiculous amounts of money. Like, oh, well, I'm about to get a new contract. You don't know what you're about to get. And if you or they're in a big year right now, they've had a great season, and then, AJ just had a season-ending injury. You don't know. You don't spend based on the right now, right? You create a budget. Does not have to be restrictive, y'all. You create a budget that gives you plenty of room to live your life, but does not ever put you into an egregious area of spending, and you live by it. I think that's really, I'm glad you said that. I think that's super important. My last question before we close is, have you ever gone back to that house?
Great question. Dang, you've got good questions. So, yes, but it's been a while. So, one of the things that, where I live now is less than a mile from where we lived.
Wow. So I probably passed it.
Well, it's hidden back in this cul-de-sac or whatever, but you'd be in the area. And I remember, and what's really funny about this particular house, it's at the end of a cul-de-sac. So you can't just drive by. You have to go, and you're in the cul-de-sac, turn around and leave, right? So it's really obvious when there's a car on that street that doesn't belong. And so early I would go by and just to see it. I do need to mention it sat vacant for 2 years. So it was not as beautiful when it finally sold than it was when we lived there. It had definitely deteriorated. And I think what drove me to go by was not the memory, I was not reliving positive memories. It was more of, I'm okay. yep, I did that house, but I'm okay. I'm okay. I just really needed to reinforce that I'm okay. And so it's probably been over 5 years.
You only went back one time?
A couple of times right around when the recovery was happening, right? So 2009, Jason lost his job. We moved. We didn't sell that house until 2011. So 2 years. We finally, when the market started to improve again, homes were starting to sell. Sold it 2011. So I probably, well, I had to list it, right? So I put it on the market and I had to go buy a couple times. And then after we sold it, maybe around 2012, where things were getting better for me, I'd go by a couple of times. But it's been a long time, probably at least 5 or 6 years since I've been there.
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to ask that because it's such an emotional, it's like a source of emotion and trauma, but also depending on when you went and look at it, it's a source of victory, right? Like I survived that. And it recently, about a month ago, we live in a gated community. There's maybe 15 houses in our community. So like you notice when someone's driving slow, everyone kind of looks out their window like, who the fuck are you? So I was here, my parents were here, and there was this car that was driving really slow by my house, and it was this older lady in it. And oh my God, I don't know why it makes me want to cry. She stops, and then I go, and I'm like, why are you here? Who are you? And she's like, my baby was in there. It was so beautiful. That made me think about that. Just going and revisiting. She had lost the house too. And then here I am with my 2 babies outside, and she was crying. It was a beautiful moment. But yes, thank you for sharing that.
And so one thing in real estate that is an important thing, or with any kind of failure, is that life does go on, right? And we can hold on really tight to the past and the pain, or we can learn to release it and know that your babies are taking over this beautiful house and creating new emotions and new memories, and allowing that to be your past, right? And moving forward. So for me, that house did represent a really happy time when we first moved in, and then a very difficult time when we had to let it go. But I've very successfully put it behind me, because I think, ultimately that was an event that happened, and it's not who I am. And, I feel like at the end of the day, someone's going to love that house, and
How long were you there? House. How long were you there?
From 2004 to 2009. So for 5 years.
So you had time to enjoy it. Like that was your home.
Every day. Loved that house. We designed it, right? Like it was exactly what I wanted.
Right. Which is why I'm excited. We're building a house right now. So I'm excited to walk through my house and be like, it's exactly what I wanted. And also because we're in a market. Right. We're in a market right now where I was going to buy something for the same price that was not going to be exactly what I wanted. So I'm excited to have that emotion. Hopefully we don't lose that house. Like hopefully we don't go through what you went through. I don't know if I could emotionally handle it. Clearly I'm unstable. I'm in therapy as well. Okay, so we'll end with, I want you to sum up how this experience made you better at your job and as a wife and a mother. What attributes did it either highlight or amplify that made you better?
Great question. So I think in 2011, I was actually looking for a job because Jason had been unemployed for 2 years. My income was not sustainable for us to live off of. And I started to look for a job, but I was unemployable because I had been a realtor for 11 years. And apparently you have 0 skills when you're a realtor. So nobody would hire me. And so the big thing that really came out of that is, okay, there's no going back. Like my ships are burned. I'm going in this direction, right? And a renewed commitment to growth and what that looks like, and allowing myself to grieve and move forward in my career, right? Allowing that to happen. And then from our marriage perspective and raising our son, I feel like when things get a little sketchy, and they have, since then, I mean, it hasn't been, sunshine and rainbows since 2012. I always say, this too will pass and we'll get through it, right? And I used to be fearful of being homeless and hungry. And what I learned those 5 years is we were never homeless and we were never hungry. We figured it out. It wasn't the greatest, but we figured it out. And so to me, that's really the big lesson is we will get through this and it will pass and things will be better on the other side.
I like that. Thank you so much for coming on. And if people want to reach out to you or talk to you about any aspect of this podcast, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so I don't mind putting my cell phone number out there, 904-349-3133. I'm a big texter. I spend my whole day texting. And then, of course, social media is always, Wendy Griffis. I don't have any, and I'm horrible at social media, but I don't have any handles that are not my name, right? So if you look me up on Instagram, I'm Wendy Griffis. If you look me up on Facebook, I'm Wendy Griffis, right? So
beautiful. We'll tag all of that as well, just so if you're listening, you don't have to just, write it down and rewind and all that. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. This was another episode of Failure Friday. We do have openings coming up in, I think the beginning of April. There might be one slot left for the end of March. I don't know. Probably not. Never mind. Don't look at April. But I would like to have more guests. You can submit an application and would love to have you guys on. Today we had Wendy, and I'm so thankful you came on, and I will talk to you probably tomorrow.
Thank you, Kendall. Appreciate you.
All right. Mwah.
Bye.
Bye.